this video, I'm going to talk about the inherent appeal of absolute analytical philosophy, logic, and scientism that is currently pervading society, and understanding that although the strong appeal is there for this to be the be-all and end-all, that there isn't necessarily this dire need for you to conform to these ideals, and there are alternatives out there which may offer some edification, because a lot of the times I find analytical philosophy guilty of casuistry, and whether or not they are as truthful to themselves as they think they're being is obviously questionable. So with the way modern, I suppose, society has come to it, is that we appreciate, particularly with the advent of computer science, a very logical and thorough way of thinking, and that this can be applied obviously to both school, but then afterwards with engineering and applied sciences, it's beneficial for one to think in a very rigid and structured manner, understanding deduction, induction, and abduction, and then being able to apply these in all certain scenarios so that you can come to the right conclusions. So this is obviously one of the most appealing ways of living your life, and I definitely can sympathize with those people who lived life like that. I think very early on in my life as well, I tended toward this field of thought because it's so appealing to know that you will come to a conclusion which can't possibly be wrong unless you've had some inviolable variable being inserted into one of the assumptions or presuppositions or something. But this does lead to scientism, which I think a lot of younger, say middle class and more educated people succumb to much more readily. They're happy to believe in this religion of science, so this church of science, in which we can bow down to the supremacy of technology and to scientific empiricism and ontology and understanding, epistemology, sorry, and understanding that we necessarily can live our lives abiding by these rigid and inflexible, impliable propositions. But I think that's very robotic, and it defeats a lot of what it means to be human. So when you take problems always so starkly and binary and fixed and rigidly, you lose a lot of the worth that sometimes comes with ambiguity on a moral spectrum, or whether or not you can apply logic. You kind of start to fixate on putting squares into round holes and misapplying tools that don't necessarily work as best as you could imagine them to. This does stem from analytical philosophy early in the 20th century, but it's definitely a trend, and I think it's one of those which I wouldn't call lazy necessarily, but it's for those gullible enough to think that there is a final answerable solution to every single question, and that you couldn't possibly not understand something using logic and rationality. It's a bit of a trap. If you read much of the early Enlightenment philosophy, their works were steeped in rationalism and deduction, in that they thought that the truths could be just derived with corollaries, and obviously we can limit ourselves to only what we know as assumptions, and therefore our deductions aren't necessarily going to follow to the ultimate conclusions of all knowledge and what we're capable of. Science in itself obviously has never advocated for a cultish behavior towards it or a rigorous belief in it. It's just a tool for which we can understand the physical realm. But when it comes to metaphysics, I think still applying these scientific principles is a bit of it's a misapprehension of what it is necessary to actually solve these problems or come to a best agreeable solution, both pragmatically and even just intellectually. I think analytical philosophy, as much as I am seemingly degrading it and perhaps speaking ill of it, it does offer a lot of important insights into human nature, which I think a lot of people would rather either proselytize about in a religious manner, or necessarily obscure with very subjective principles that tend to be, say, postmodern French school of thought, when subjectivity can reign supreme over any rigid and analytical, rational and foreseeing thought of how things should go or could go. So it's not that you necessarily have to be irrational, it's more the reliance on rationality as a building block can be deleterious to how one behaves in all situations if they're so adherent that they are inflexible of changing course or tacking into a new sort of modus operandi.